Eric, let's start with you.
Thanks, Mike, and I appreciate the kind words that you just said about me. And it feels really weird when you say it still. And I know you're teaching me how to get over that. But yeah, originally from Long Island, New York, joined the military in 1999. I joined the military because all my family served. So my grandfather, my father, my brother, everybody served. Chose the same path in 1999 and made a career out of it. 20 years in the Air Force. And retired 2020, March 2020, and moved back to I call it my home state, my stomping ground, Arizona, where I'm currently living at.
And how many total deployments?
So 10 total deployments.
Hot damn. Rich.
Yeah. Hey, Mike.
Hey, buddy. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be with this group. I'm very honored and humbled. Rich DeVinny. Grew up in Westport, Connecticut, and joined the SEAL teams in 1996. And did a tour in Hawaii, but have been in Virginia Beach since. And obviously lived the military and team life prior to 9/11, and then post 9/11 did 20 years. Did I think 7 tours to Iraq, 5 to Afghanistan, and then a few smattering here and there. So I think 15 or so total. But yeah, I'm honored to be here. And I think it's good to have this type of discussion and think and talk through kind of what we saw on the ground. And I think, it was an interesting time frame inside of which to live and experience. And so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Thanks, Rich. And again, welcome back. We've got Brent. We brought Brent in from the Army so that we make sure that we do this correctly. Brent, welcome.
Thank you. Brent Tucker, born and raised in Sanford, Florida. I joined the military because of 9/11, so this subject's near and dear to my heart for sure. It's post 9/11 military is all I knew. Recently retired, got medically retired, and I live in Orlando, Florida now.
Well, thank you for joining us. And then, of course, we had to bring in a lone Canadian, a guy I've known for a long time.
Token Canadian.
Token Canadian.
Yeah.
Glenn.
Thanks, Mike. And let me just say the last 12 hours have rekindled sort of all the good memories of what it was like to be in teams like ours with just nothing but laughter and sort of, really good times. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. Thanks, Mike, for the invite down. My name is Glenn Cowan. I served 20 years with the Canadian Armed Forces, 13 years with Canadian Special Operations Forces with a National Mission Unit. I grew up in the woods kind of north of Toronto. I always wanted to play Army, and so I thought that would make a pretty good career. I was really compelled to join the military when I was 15. I did a summer in Europe and I toured battlefields, and I kind of made a promise to myself that if something like that ever happened again, I wanted to be a part of it. And so I joined in 1997 and was just coming out of sort of my final phase of basic training just before 9/11, and very much a right time, right place. I was posted to a Canadian unit that was attached to an American combat brigade team, and we went to Afghanistan in the months following 9/11, and it was just 20 years of high-paced tempo and good times. So I did 10 operational deployments, kind of 4 combat tours, and then a bunch of other deployments in various parts of the world. And I retired in 2016, medically released, but it was also the right time to move on.
Glenn, thank you. You're absolutely right. The last 24 hours, especially dinner with you guys, it puts me right back in the seat. And you're like, I miss this. Whatever that is, being with the boys, it's like you fall right back in, even if you didn't necessarily deploy with one another. There's a common thread amongst all of us. Glenn, you bring up a great point. I'm always fascinated by why people join the military. I'll be straight on, just straight up. I joined because of probably Universal Studios and Paramount because they make that look cool. And to me, I'm like, what kid wouldn't want to do that? I didn't come from a military lineage. everyone's grandfather pretty much, for the most part, served in World War II. Mine were no different. But the closing sort of chapter for me was I met a Force Recon Marine, and weighing like $130 at the time. I'm like, that guy is exactly what I want to be. And I was young, and that set me on the path. I'd be interested to know why you guys joined. What drove you to join, Rich?
Well, I grew up wanting to be a pilot. My dad was a private pilot, so we used to go flying with him. So my twin brother and I wanted to be military pilots. There was Air Force or Navy, and growing up by the ocean, the Navy seemed to make sense because every time you go to a Navy base, it's by the ocean. Plus, you get to land on ships, so that was pretty cool. But I learned about the SEALs in the first Gulf War. Actually, I learned about most special operations in the first Gulf War. And when I found out that there were these guys who kind of lived in every environment, but made the water their home, right? The audacity of making the ocean their home. I just I wanted to try. I mean, ultimately, I wanted to see if I could do it, and so I chose. And I didn't want to be a pilot and look over at the teams and be like, I wonder if I could do it, right? So yeah, I applied and fortunately got in and then made it through.
Unfortunately, you got in.
I said fortunately. I said fortunately got in, and then fortunately made it through, right? And my twin brother went on to be a pilot, so it was interesting because he lived vicariously through me, and I lived vicariously through him. So,
but at the dinner table, nobody wants to hear his stories; they want to hear yours.
No, that's not true. My dad loves aviation, so he's still his aviation stories were just as cool. And again, I think in the spirit of all of our careers, there wasn't much I talked about at the dinner table. There's taking combat stories, I think, has to be very specific in what you are trying to draw out from that to help the person you're telling. It's not just I'm going to boost myself up by telling a story. Because I always think about, hey, what is the lesson here that will help the person I'm telling? So in my, there's only a few combat stories that actually do that. A lot of training stories, which is cool because you can talk about training. But yeah, that's why I joined. So,
Eric,
I think mine originally I said it's a family tradition was why I initially made that hard decision, but I played with G.I. Joes when I was younger, and Tunnel Rat was like my favorite one. I pictured myself going in with an elbow flashlight and a K-bar and going and clearing tunnels. Like, I grew up thinking that was what I wanted to do, and then empowered by Universal Studios or John Rambo movies that just kind of solidified it. But I'll tell you that was childlike mentality. I would say I joined for those reasons, but in 2001, it was definitely my resolve was strengthened, and I was directed, and I knew what my purpose was. But initially, yeah, it was just that just doing cool shit in the woods, and I wanted to do that for a living.
What drove you into Air Force Special Operations? What was that final decision between all the other special operations?
So
choose the Air Force.
So I couldn't go to the Navy because look at what they have to wear. Look at those uniforms. I can't do that. I can't do that. And then I couldn't do the Marine Corps. My brother was in the Marine Corps. My brother flew also. He's a F-18 pilot, and my father served in the Marine Corps too. So I couldn't pick the Marine Corps, and I couldn't pick the Navy. And the Air Force was claiming that they had something that was called Superman School. So I thought that sounded interesting, and I took a swing at that one.
That's awesome. And I do, for the listeners, want to say that Eric, you are very eccentric, given the shirt that you wore last night at dinner.
Agreed.
We will release those photos.
I'm hip, guys.
Glenn, you said he had to get home to
give his wife a shirt back.
Yeah,
give her a shirt back.
We're not letting that one go.
And for the listeners, if you don't wear anything that looks like you're on a year-long fishing trip, then apparently you're all messed up. You need to go back to the drawing board. So unless you look like you're wearing Carhartt or you're wearing some sort of Arc'teryx. Yeah.
So, Brent, of the five of us, you're the one that joined after 9/11. Did you have any notions of joining the military prior to that, or was that the final straw for you?
I don't want to say none at all, because I came from a very pro-military family. We'd go to air shows. My dad loved Vietnam. We'd watch all sorts of Vietnam shows on the History Channel. We were always, I would say, pro-military. But if you'd asked me on September 10th, hey, are you ever going to join the military? I'd say no. I love those guys, all for them, but I'm going to grow up in a family business feed store and carry bags of feed out for the rest of my life. It had been the family business for 30 years, and I was going to carry that on. So it was quite, obviously September 11th was quite the shock, enough to completely take me off my whole career path.
What made you choose? Because you started your career in the Army Special Forces. What was it about the Special Forces that drew you in?
Actually, I think I probably have the most indirect path to a Tier 1 unit. Is I actually joined the National Guard first, Air Defense National Guard. So I had a family friend, Chief Butters. Went to his house. I told him, I got a lot of hate in my heart. I'd like to join the military. And he goes, "Hey, well, I'm in the National Guard. You should come on in with us." So I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to join, and he was my avenue into the military. So I joined the National Guard Air Defense. They went on a sister battery, went on a deployment and came back where they guarded the gates for 12 months. And I said, "Well, that's not gonna fulfill what needs to be done in my heart for September 11th." And so that's when I looked into other avenues, and there was 20th Group, which is a National Guard unit, and they're like, "Hey, if you want to go, take it to the enemy, the Green Berets is where you need to go." And that's that started my path to special operations.
Amazing. Glenn.
Growing up, my friends used to make fun of me and call me Combat Boy, but it was just I think there's just a calling in a lot of us, and there's a compulsion to serve in the capacities that we served in. And so I had that deep compulsion to be in the military and be in special operations, and I knew that it was kind of Tier 1 or bust. Like, I wasn't going to make a career as a soldier unless it was in that environment. But it really had my eyes opened on my first tour in 2002. Like I said, I was with a conventional Army battalion. We were attached to an American brigade group, and one of the other infantry companies had got a mission to, support some guys from your old organization, actually, and they were prepping to go and. They're out zeroing their weapons, and an American F-16 dropped a GPU on them, killed 4 guys in a friendly fire incident. It was our first casualties in Canada since the Korean War in sort of a combat theater. And, the company and the platoon that I was a part of very rapidly took that role. So we got kind of thrust into sort of Eastern Afghanistan tribal areas with some folks, and I just really had my eyes opened because the environment was so small that, OPSEC was kind of out the window, even though we were a foreign country and a conventional unit providing some security and some support to U.S. forces. That was, watching the operations at that level and in a small way, even, lending a little bit of support. I kind of said, if I'm going to spend my career fighting a war, it's going to be in that capacity. And immediately came home and did what I needed to do to prepare for selection.
As you talk to guys, whatever pushed them towards special operations, you do hear a common thread that their motivation was only amplified by watching the instructors who put them through. When I was at the School of Infantry for the Marine Corps, we had some recon Marines come and brief us, and everything about those individuals, from their posture, from their humble confidence, just drove me to, as you said, Glenn, to want to make it to that level. And then when you find out there's levels above that, it keeps driving you. Do you guys have any stories about the instructors that just sort of solidified you made the right choice, or maybe a platoon chief, a platoon sergeant that of your first platoon that just drove it home? Eric?
Yeah, I have 2 examples. I have one of the wrong example.
Yeah.
Which is very funny. It's Ranger School, and it's 2002, and the instructors are, there's some hard ass dudes, but there's guys in the class that are battalion guys that are going through to get their tab, and they've been to war twice already. It's 2002, and you have some instructors that are sitting there yelling at you. So I got to see the other end of the spectrum too, to see, okay, that's what I don't want to be. I want to be a guy who's out there getting it, and I want to be able to provide some insight to the guys that are getting ready to go out there. But you do see the guys that have cut their teeth already, and you look up to them, and they almost seem like bigger than life. And you start hearing some of these stories about what these guys are doing on the front lines. And if that doesn't motivate you, when they tell you that story, because the training day is going to be really hard, but when you hear that story and they're telling you this is important, you have to do it, there's no question, like, I'm going to get through that training because this guy who's tested and vetted, he's telling me that this is what I need to be really, really good at. This is what I need to focus on. So it's very motivational to have those guys above you that I still look back to them. Those guys are still, they're heroes to me. They're superheroes to me.
Yeah, when I went to SOPC, it was right before selection. It's like a 2 or 3 week conditioning course, and that was my first introduction in the special operations world. So you got to pass that before you can go to SFAS. And I still remember his name, Scott Zastro. He was from the Triple Nickel. He was on the invasion of Afghanistan. Him, there was 2 or 3 other instructors. All of them were just larger than life guys, both personality wise and physically. And even though they were funny, but they weren't funny when they were talking to you, because they were quick witted, making fun of people, making you feel real small. But hey, if you didn't like it, then out PT them, but you couldn't. If you didn't like it, then out swim them, but you couldn't. Like they held the standard, and I'll always remember those guys. And they really, from my first experience in the special operations realm, they really showed the standard, and I still remember this day.
I think that's why we put our best instructors forward, because one, they're representation of the community, and they talk a big game, but they follow through on it, and that is inspiring.
Yeah, I would say the other thing, and it was interesting for me because I, going through basic training, there was nothing going on, so none of my instructors had been in the fight, right? But looking at both processes, whether it was basic SEAL training or the selection for the specialized command, I think as an officer, one of the things that really drove me was the fact that both training programs were run by enlisted, and for me there was a really deep understanding and a humility and a desire to perform, because these guys had an investment in me, because they knew that if I passed, I would be then someone in charge, right? And that was really very special for me to consider, was the fact that these guys were really, and you could tell, we've joked about this before, there are certain instructors who are like, okay, that guy's not the real deal, but there were other instructors who were really assholes, right? But you knew they were assholes for a reason, and you could see it, and you almost appreciated their assholeness because you knew what they were asking you to do was for purpose and for reason, and I thought that just understanding that process was very, very cool for me. So
I'm going to go sort of off topic here, but I do want to address this, and thank you for bringing this up, Rich. Is there's a lot of preconceived notions about the military, and what a lot of people don't know about the military who've never served is we actually put a precedence on education and learning. The organization that provides the most scholarships in the nation is the U.S. Army. And the line between enlisted and officer no longer is, let's say, separated by education. When I was a troop commander, 3 of my guys had master's degrees when I had none. And I really didn't get my master's degree until I retired out of the military. So, the recruitment into the special operations community has been more competitive than it ever has. Even during our era coming in, you have kids that are, one, physical freaks. They're physical specimens. They're highly intelligent, and they're all just chomping at the bit to get one of those billets to get to SFAS, which is Special Forces Assessment Selection, or to BUDS, or to the Air Force Special Operations. And it's impressive. I mean, we ran into 2 young SEALs from a East Coast SEAL team last night at dinner, and you just get this sense that these kids they're stronger, they're faster, they're more intelligent, they're better all around. Guys, I want to get to September 11th, but before we get there, I want to know where you were at on September 10th. and what your world was prior to the attacks, where your mindset was. Were you going to make the military a career? Glenn, let's start with you.
September 10th. I had just I was a reserve officer in a reserve unit in Montreal. I had made a component transfer to the regular force, and I had just finished my sort of final stage of infantry officer training. And I received a posting to a Western Canadian regiment called the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. I was ecstatic. I was going to the 3rd Battalion, which was an airborne battalion. And so I was on my way out to my first conventional infantry platoon that I was to take command of. And I was at my parents' house flying through Toronto on the morning of, on September 10th, and I crashed there the night and woke up on the morning of September 11th and watched the towers fall. And so I was on my way to the start of, my military career. And it just so happens that battalion was Canada's rapid reaction battalion to a NATO task force. And so we were kind of in the breach. And so I was right time, right place to get involved very early on in Afghanistan and in the sort of global war on terror. But I was thinking that the military would be kind of a career, but as I said, it was kind of special operations or bust, and it was a bit of a voyage of discovery, and I was kind of right place, right time to be sort of in the sort of early vanguard for Canada's contribution to sort of the war on terror and the Afghan campaign.
Brent, where were you on September 10th?
Yeah, again, this one's pretty short and sweet. I'm working at a family business feed store, carrying out bags of feed and bales of hay for people. Not military, not even on my horizon. In fact, I was scared of roller coasters still. I wouldn't have been pegged for special operations on September 10th. I'll assure you that.
Well, you want to, the name of the show is Truth and Drive, so that's a little truth there. Thank you for that vulnerability. Rich, where were you at?
First of all, I'm still scared of roller coasters. I hate them. I was interesting enough. I think I was contemplating my career. I had done a tour in Hawaii with our delivery vehicle team, so a lot of diving, which I enjoyed because I love being underwater. But I was a little bit frustrated because there was nothing going on, and I felt like, gosh, was this the right choice? I had eventually gotten to an East Coast SEAL team, but the only way I got to get there was I had to agree to do what's called an L&O tour. I had to go deploy on a ship as the SEAL L&O for the Admiral staff. And so on September 10th, I was literally sitting on the pier down in Mayport, Florida, looking at the John F. Kennedy carrier because I was embarking. We were going to get underway the next day. And I was just wondering, gosh, have I made the right choice? And then just, moved on. And I think, of course, the next morning I'm walking around checking in to the ship and looking at the TV screens and seeing at least the first hit. And at that point, they didn't know really what had happened. They thought it was a small plane or whatever. But then, of course, the second hit, and we're like, oh boy, the world's changed now. And so, yeah, it was a shift. It was certainly a shift in mindset. It was almost like, gosh, now I wonder what's going to, and it was almost that wonderment, that kind of like, I wonder what's going to happen. I need to, let's just see how this one plays out, was really kind of my mindset moving forward. So,
of all the SEALs I've talked to, there's again another common thread of when they question whether this is right for them, and it's when they end up on a ship.
That's right.
Something about ships.
A lot of time. It's like jail.
Yes. Eric.
So I was stationed in Hawaii also. I was attached to a light infantry unit. And the biggest thing on my radar, the most important thing on my radar, was making sure that my Humvee didn't have any class 3 leaks on it and that it was really clean. And it was an 1800 is what the form is called, that when you're inspecting your vehicle and it passes, that was the number one concern for me. I wanted to have the best vehicle because that was a big thing. When you're a young enlisted guy, you maintain your equipment. That was the biggest priority for me. And then obviously things changed the next morning.
Yeah, reputation is everything. And we know that within our community. Right.
Right.
You can, it takes years upon years to build a reputation. But you can destroy it like that.
Say it.
Well, hey, that's a good point, by the way, for those people listening who might, be running businesses or having people, new people show up. When you're a new guy, when you're young in an organization, your reputation is built on those little things, right? I mean, those little details that you pay attention to, the Humvee and things like that. And that's just something to take into account, I think, for people to understand what the mindset of someone new to an organization is coming in with. That it should be noted that reputation starts small with little things.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I think what's interesting when people come to me for advice and things that they're going to do in life, they always kind of like preface it with, well, whatever I'm going to do, it's not what you did. It's not from the unit you came from. I tell them, I don't care. Like if you're going to go be a dishwasher at McDonald's, I want you to be a tier 1 dishwasher at McDonald's. I don't care that, where your life takes you. Just be the best at what you do.
Yeah.
And that's something we were speaking about before we started this. And my former community, I think we learned a lot from you guys with that mentality of just, if someone's given you this job, if this is a particular mission or mandate, even if you don't think it's right, or it's your job or it's beneath you in any way, it's coming to you for a reason. Yeah. And we certainly pulled a ton of sort of cultural learnings from you guys in just apply yourself to that task, because someone thinks it's strategic and it's coming to you for a reason. So do the best damn job you can.
Yeah. As a new guy, your senior leaders are watching, and it has to come back to trust. Can you do the small things well? Because if you can't even execute on the small things, then how can we trust you to do the most important things on your own when we give you a troop of guys to go forward and do what's right? Well,
also just to add to that, it's focus, right? I mean, are you able to focus on your moment, on the moment? Because that's the most important in the moment, right? And it's funny because I was on the ship, right? So September 11th happened. I automatically felt like I was out of the game because now I have to do a deployment on a ship. I'm like, everybody's going to go to war and I'm left behind. And I remember having a conversation with myself and saying, wait a second, what can I control in the moment? I can control my performance in this role, right? And that's really what leadership is looking at. Are you able to, can they trust you to focus on the moment that you're supposed to focus on, and not chase the dragon and look down the road that things that don't matter. Focus on the moment, do what needs to be done, and then move on to the next thing.
I don't get too far ahead, but just to add on to that, I feel like everyone kind of had the same mentality as far as we're going to miss the war. Yeah. We're going to miss the war. 20 years later, we look back and we think we didn't miss the war.
Yeah.
Who'd ever thought it was, we're going to be there for 20 years.
Right.
That's a great segue. And I'm going to tell a quick story. And then I want to know, guys, I want to know viscerally what you were feeling when you watched those planes go into the tower in a few days after. I was at Texas A&M on something called the MESET program, which is the Marine Enlisted Commissioning Education Program. Just as I said, the military puts a precedence on learning in education. This was the coolest program ever. They took me as a sergeant in the Marine Corps and said, hey, do you want to become an officer? We'll send you back to get your education. We'll pay for it. And the Marine Corps did. Unbeknownst to me, I didn't know 9/11 was going to happen. But when it did, I felt alone. Because one, I'm at a university. There were other Marines there. They weren't recon Marines. And I remember calling my dad. And I said, hey, I'm contacting the Marine Corps. I'm dropping out. I'm going back to 1st Recon Battalion. I need to get over there. And, he said, hey, he knew I wanted to become a SEAL. He said, hey, son, I have a feeling this war is going to be a long war. You can do more good as an officer in the military. Stay the course. And unfortunately, he was absolutely right. And I hate giving my old man credit sometimes. But no, he's been my most trusted mentor. Guys, you watched that event take place, and that impacted every American, whether they were in the military or not, and Canadians, and the rest of our allies. What were the feelings go through you when that happened, Eric?
I think on September 11th, the feelings that I had were, I made the right decision for my career, for what I chose to do as a profession, join the profession of arms. I knew for a fact, without a doubt, that I made the right decision there, regardless of, what I'd done up until that point. And then I was just emboldened and strengthened by my resolve, because I saw the first team blow out out of Hawaii. They stopped through Hawaii, and I think I'm pretty sure it was triple nickel that was ripping through there. And I just remember seeing the triple stack and these guys that were just laser focused. And I wanted to be, I wished that I was that person right there, but I knew you can't just wish it. You have to start taking steps. So from that moment, I kid you not, like as soon as I saw it, I ran back to my unit and I'm just knocking pull-ups out, just motivated. I'm just crazy motivated. And then from there was a straight shot to get to the pointiest part of the military apparatus, because I wanted to be those guys that were going in. They were going to deal some death. Those guys had a look on them that was motivating for me. So however awful it might sound, through that loss, I think it clarified what my purpose was going to be for the next 20 years. I knew I'm going to be in this fight for 20 years because that is what I've been put on this earth to do.
Rich.
I'm going to give 3 emotions, and they're going to sound disjointed, but I'll explain. Curiosity, anger, and pride. I asked my wife to marry me in July of 2001. And when I did, she didn't know a lot about SEALs, but I said, we do deployments, it's this type of cycle, blah, 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 it should be fine, right? And then 9/11 happens, right? Or the whole world turns upside down. So I think part of it was curiosity. Okay, where are we going? What's this going to look like? And my wife and I had a lot of talks about that. Anger, right? Because of seeing what happened. But it was really interesting because I got more angry when I saw the video of people celebrating the attacks than I did when I saw the towers come out. When I saw the towers come out, it was more sadness, right? But I got angry when I saw people celebrating it. But then really overwhelming pride with how the nation pulled together. And I part of me misses that in today's environment, right? The way we came together, the way we all kind of were, and the world too, wasn't just the U.S. We were just like, hey, we're gonna do this, and we're all one, and we all had this common purpose. I get chills when I think. I had tremendous pride, and I miss that. But those are the 3 primary emotions.
Leading up to that, it was amazing that we put our petty differences aside because we all had a united purpose.
Yeah.
When you give people and I think that's what's completely missing today and why we're so divisive, is that we had a united purpose. And if you can find the positive in a very negative, bad event, it was that we came together and we were united. Again, not only as a nation, but as a world. Brent.
I think for me it's a little bit different because I was a civilian when September 11th happened. And, and really about me at that point in my life, I was a fairly quiet kid. I didn't get into a lot of fights. I'd never had to deal with, with anything, truly, I lived a fairly simple life. And when this, for whatever reason, it struck a chord in me. And for days, I was just flood of emotions, just enraged. And I, started, thinking that this isn't going to go away. And there's only one way to make it go away. And I told myself, really, my decision to join was fairly simple. I said, I don't want to have a life with any regrets. And so I joined because of that. But truly, I mean, looking back, I haven't really think about it. So I was sitting here thinking about talking to you guys. I mean, every aspect in our life and the wickets we go through our career from beginning to the end is how we meet challenges. And for me, I think that was the first time I had a decision and a challenge made, to the type of person that I didn't know I was, but and that was the beginning of me meeting challenges, and that would continue the rest of my career, actually.
How old were you when 9/11 happened, and what was, or how quickly after 9/11 did you sign up?
I was 20 years old, and I signed up on the 23rd, September 23rd.
No kidding.
Yep. I talked to a recruiter probably September, if I had to put a date to it, probably 17th, 18th, because it took me, you had to go take the ASVAB and sign a contract. But that was my base entry date, was September 23rd.
So you were truly one of the few that enlisted shortly after, within the few weeks after 9/11.
But absolutely, and in fact, I was so enraged by it. I shamed my little brother into joining too. I said, "Come on, we need more than just me. You're coming too." And he's still in the military as well.
No
He just got picked up with an E9 list.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Glenn.
I mean, my thoughts, I think, probably different and similar to a lot of yours. Again, as a Canadian, I remember vividly saying, America's going to war tonight. And I didn't know how that would impact Canada at the time. And, we ended up losing, I think, 24 Canadians in Lower Manhattan that morning. We were obviously, part of every coalition. So there was a lot of hope that we would be part of the American response, which we ended up sort of, committing to very early at a national level, which was, I think, an overwhelming response of positivity. It was like you said, nonpartisan. It was just doing the right thing to counter this new world order. And so, there was a surreal emotion. There was, hope that we would be involved in delivering some justice and being a part of, what ended up being the next sort of 20 years. And then just this, sadness, I think just overall sadness, because it made it real that it was in North America, like it was close to home, very close to home.
Arguably, we were at war before September 11th. We just didn't know it. I think this is part of our nation sort of sometimes looks at the world through rose-colored glasses. There are people that will always hate Americans, that will always want to kill us, that are planning attacks right now. Just because we pulled out of Afghanistan and the last of our troops are no longer there, doesn't mean we're not still at war with the Taliban. Guys, I want to get into sort of the evolution of your combat deployments, because I'm sure we'd all agree, I'll say it this way, we're all probably full of piss and vinegar on the first few combat deployments. But with time, that changes. And everything as you mature, you gain rank, more experience and more combat deployments under your belt, things change. I don't want to get to how things changed yet, but give me a sense of your deployments early on, where your mindset was, if it was just immense pride, plus you have a lot of energy still. Where was your head at for those first, let's say 1 to 5 deployments? Let's start with Rich.
So the first combat deployment was in fact to Iraq for me, and I think I wanted to be very careful, as I was the officer in charge. I was the platoon commander. I had some great senior enlisted and obviously great operators, but I wanted to be very careful about how I approached the scenario and the deployment. Really, I think special operators pride ourselves on precision and understanding exactly what we need to do in the moment and logical thought, right? And so people ask me, well, were you angry? Did you hate these people? And I think we have to be real careful. Hate is much like love. They're actually the exact same, except they're different polarities, right? They are. It's directed. It's very powerful, and it's exhausting. It's very energy expending. Okay. It also, both emotions, they disable logical thinking. Okay. We make mistakes when we're in love. We make mistakes when we hate, right? It takes work. It takes a lot of energy. So I think it was really interesting for us to have to look at the problem and look at the targets and look at the goals very almost pragmatically or agnostically, just try to think about, okay, what's the mission here, and think logically through that. And so going to Iraq the first time, it was kind of like, okay, what do we need to do here and why? What are those things that we need to accomplish? And let's make sure we're making decisions in a way that's congruent with the mission, but also takes into account logic and not emotion. And that was a good. Now I have to give credit to my senior enlisted as well, because they were really helpful in that process. We were really in sync with that. We were the way we thought, and so we approached that deployment in that way, and had a successful deployment. And those types of things. Now, at the meantime, even when we didn't lose anybody, loss also gives you experience. It tells you, wait, this is not as Hollywood and sexy as I thought it would be. It's real. It's visceral. And so then you start understanding, okay, what are those lessons you take from that, and hopefully take the emotions from loss and turn that into logical thinking. Don't let that drive you too much, because again, we knew we were in the long game, and you have to think about energy and how you actually play the long game. And it's not through these very, very powerful emotions, or at least it's okay to have those emotions, but make sure they're understood and they're kind of worked through before you actually go out there. So,
Glenn,
my first combat deployment was in the months following 9/11. I consider myself fortunate enough to be sort of part of the deploying unit in the infantry that first saw combat since sort of Korea for Canada. We didn't get a much sort of combat action, but we were a part of a few major maneuvers, sort of on the back end of Operation Anaconda. I remember just being awe-inspired, Eric, by the sheer power of the U.S. Air Force, and just the overall ability to mobilize and move was honestly like awe-inspiring. And being on the ground is like daisy cutters are dropping in like some of the passes sort of in the Shawicot Valley, and having the blast almost knock you over are so powerful. Just it was again, as kind of Canada without that power, seeing these assets. So I was very, very impressed, very humbled, and saw what it was like to be part of a really big machine. I was successful sort of following with selection into the special operations community, and again sort of in the right time and place for the way my former unit deployed, and I was sort of in the sort of early onset helping shape, I thought, some strategic direction for how our government would respond to now the sort of longer war. And I was immature. I look back on it, and I was a young troop commander. I made, I don't know how many thousands of mistakes. I thought I was doing the right thing, but a lot of the time I wasn't. There was definitely an immaturity with the way I approach things. Not like I don't think in kind of like a callous or flippant way, but just, trying to, balance sort of four very different opinionated team leaders that were working with me, trying to incorporate everyone's ideas and thoughts. And what I noticed personally was just an experiential maturity that kind of unfolded, and that I would sort of categorize that with just an evolving tactical patience. When in the early deployments, I just wanted to, rush to the sound of gunfire, and that's not always the best way to approach things. So I developed, I think, a better tactical patience in terms of, like you said, Rich, applying a little more logical thought to some problems, and I listened a lot more. My listening skills to guys that knew way more than I did really evolved over the sort of duration of my deployments.
I think that's natural. I think Brent said it best this morning as we were all talking, that sort of a old bull, young bull analogy. And as you gain more experience, you learn to develop that tactical patience and be more deliberate about the things that you do. Brent, how about you? Those early deployments, man. Where was your headspace at?
Oh, I can't talk about those early deployments without smiling.
Yeah.
Young bull all the way. I had, the Q course is so long. Again, I was chasing a war that I thought was on its way out. So in fact, being a part of 20th Group, I strapped hang with another battalion going to Afghanistan because I wanted to get there immediately. And then while I was there, the team I was assigned to got orders to go to Iraq. So my first deployment to Afghanistan, it was a Wild West. It was a very violent deployment, but it was everything that I was looking for. I went home, repacked my bags, met my team in Iraq who had just been there for a few weeks, and that was during surge time. Another good spot to be in and a good time to be there. I know it sounds almost immature, and I was then, but I loved it. I was by my first 2 or 3 rotations, I knew I was going to be addicted to war, and nothing would ever fill that. It was
a lot of fun. Deploying with your buddies was an incredible amount of fun, and you get into different scenarios and gunfights and problems gone wrong that you got to kind of like sort of unfuck on the fly to kind of get yourself out of them. It was a lot of fun, and it was hard and challenging, but I think it's totally awesome to be able to say, like, I enjoyed it. I look forward to a deployment. When the pager went off and we got bugged out, it was like, that was the best part of anything we did. So yeah, I can empathize with that for sure.
I just want to remind you guys that we have a clean podcast rating right now.
Yeah, but that's an actual verb.
Like, you got the wrong crew then.
No.
You knew this when you invited us.
Lots of bleeping going
Brent and
on.
Mikey in the production
but
studio are waving.
What I just said was actually like a mission task verb, almost like to unfuck something is a verb. Sorry, I did it again. Ou en français, si vous préférez.
There you go.
But okay, we'll keep it clean, Mike.
I'm joking. I think it was General Patton who said any officer who doesn't use profanity couldn't lead their way out of a piss-soaked paper bag.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, you actually bring up a point. And I don't try to explain this. I just don't want to talk about war with people that haven't experienced it. I don't think there's no way to articulate it. And for us to sit here, and I know we sit here across the board and said we loved what we did. We loved going to war. Because one, there was a sense of purpose behind what we were doing. We were attacked. 3,000 lives were lost. British, Americans, Canadians, French. We had a sense of purpose. Let me shape it this way, because we can't explain when somebody says I love war because you sound like a sociopath. Did those first deployments fill something spiritually and mentally for you guys that we answered our nation's call? Was there a sense of fulfillment that you're finally taking action against the enemy?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely, for me, because like I said, that was everything from the time I joined to what I trained for to the time I actually got to carry it out. Was everything that I was searching for and trying to fulfill. It was.
But you didn't have those thoughts on September 10th. At no point did you say, "I ever want to go forward and kill people."
No, and I couldn't have. I couldn't have wrapped my mind around that. In fact, it's if someone had came in on September 10th and said, "Hey, you're going to go to Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. You're going to jump out of planes 30,000 feet. You're going to dive on Draegers," and I'd look at them and be like, "You got the wrong Brent Tucker." Yeah, you can't even fathom that on September 10th as a civilian. You can't.
Eric?
Yeah, I think my resolve, I ended up figuring out what reality was. I trained from September 11th to make it to my first formative engagement, my first battle, if you will. And I think that's when the resolve really, really kicked in. And I think it goes back to what you're saying about love. Like, I think that it comes down to love of the brothers that you're serving with. And I can remember that feeling of my boss getting shot and my friend getting shot, and knowing that I'm the person that needs to do something to turn the tide. I have to medically evacuate them, and I have to strike danger close, and I have to get this enemy to fall back. And I remember, I can still put myself back in that same feeling where your body shuts down and you go into, it's your nervous system's kicking in and your sympathetic nervous system's kicking in. And I remember just becoming hyper focused. And the only thing I wanted to do was take the pressure off of my brothers. That's all I wanted to do. So it was the clearest, most vivid thing that I've ever felt. And then that also made me feel like this is exactly where I belong. I've been working so hard to make it to this level. And now that I'm here and I can affect the battle space and I can do something about it, I knew for a fact this is where I belong. And then just like Brent said, then it becomes this addiction. Like it's an addiction, and it's not an addiction to war, but it's an addiction to backing your brothers up. You'll never let your brothers go forward without you. If you have a choice, you will go to back your brothers up. And it's not necessarily about whatever savage you're going after, whatever legitimate enemy you're going after. It's just the fact that you want to stand toe to toe online with your buddy. And if you can't do that, that's more detrimental than going to war. I hurt when I could not go on my first deployment after I got pulled off the line. That hurt seeing the team go forward. So it becomes this addiction. And however sick it might sound to people, you just don't understand until you've been in conflict with another man. Another man is trying to take your life, and you have somebody to the left and the right of you that is trying to protect you, but they're also trying to do the same mission. So it's very addicting.
Rich?
Yeah, I think this is a great point that Eric brings up, and I think where we get in trouble is just this word war. Okay, war is way too simplistic a word to use. Okay, I think because I'm someone who deployed I deployed a couple times before the war, right? And so I understand, so I know the difference in how they felt, and the difference is this sense of purpose. This difference is the mission that you were all congealed around, and the brotherhood and the working together, and you add into that the threat, right? Because the threat intensifies everything, and now you're working together with other human beings to conduct a mission under duress, under threat. That's what we could dive into the neurology of this, right? But this is what we become addicted to, is that process, right? The war, the implication of killing other human beings, that's a whole separate part that is unfortunately a factor of war, right? And a factor in terms of what we chose to do. But this idea that we're bonded, we're working towards a common purpose. I mean, the deployments prior to the war, I mean, you deploy for presence. You were just there, and you're doing some training stuff. And we still had the brotherhood and the kind of cool stuff, and you had funny stories about drinking out in town and things like that. But there was no like common purpose, common mission where that was so intense and so kind of visceral, right? And so I think this is what we all, guys like us, really say to ourselves, this is what I really enjoyed, and this is what I kind of got addicted to, right? So, yeah.
For me, like I said earlier, I was very moved on a tour, like a trip to Normandy. I just wanted to be a part of something like that if it ever happened again. So throughout the experiences with the global war on terror and deployments, I just felt I was always a part of something bigger. And that was a really powerful motivator for me. This might be a bit controversial on the Canadian side of the house, but war is good for a military. Certainly in Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces had very much a reputation of being a peacekeeping force. And Blue Berets, and it's a part of Canadian identity and part of pride. But our nation was forged in 1917 at Vimy Ridge, when all four divisions fought together. Like, we're a nation that formed fighting war, and our military hadn't been at war since Korea, and it allowed sort of the logistics chain, the operations. It focused our training. It made things real, and for us it took a very small military and really professionalized it. And we had losses throughout our campaigns, which are tragic. I don't want to sort of downplay those losses, but that's a fact of life when you're in combat. And overall, our experiences nationally, I think, were very positive because of this unified purpose. And it did a lot more than just, avenge and get the bad guy. It professionalized our military in a very positive way.
Absolutely.
let me. So this is my observation. I want to know if this sort of was a similar feeling that you guys had on my first few deployments. I actually ended up in 2 battles in Iraq, and the combat was pretty intense. And I personally did not want to redeploy. For the listeners, military they have set sort of deployments. We're on a rotation, and it'd be the end of 6-7 months, and it was our time to go home. And I absolutely did not want to go home. Did you guys have a similar feeling to that, Brent?
For my first deployment, not so much, because I knew I was going to go back to my assigned team and go to Iraq. So I was very much ready and willing to go do that. I don't remember a time where I wasn't ready to go home. Usually for me, by the end of it, let me tell you, you introduce wife and kids into that mix.
He has to say this, by the way. Beautiful bride.
This is the production meeting.
Those deployments only get longer and longer and longer. So that wasn't the same with me.
I would echo that. I would say, and again, maybe it's a little bit more of the pragmatic approach. I recognized that we have a cycle of performance when we're out there doing the job, and that cycle will tend to drop off, and the rotations help to prevent complacency, prevent the normalcy of the scene, so you can go home, you can switch it. And then, of course, depending on your home life, with a wife and small kids, you're like, okay, need that downtime. So I think, I was never in a position where I wanted to stay, but I certainly didn't. I certainly looked forward to the cycle and the workup and doing it again.
Right. It'd take me about 2 months of being home, and I was
right.
And I was and I was already looking for what the schedule was like.
I thought about the same thing. I thought about there were certain deployments where I was waiting for the next one because I knew we were on deck for the real sexy mission. So some deployments I was like, just hurry up, do your time, and then this next one's going to be great. But then there were some times where I thought to myself, if we could stay if we have one more month, we could achieve what we were trying to get. And that kind of sucks handing it over to the next brothers, even though you've been teeing it up and you've just been hacking away. But then you look at it and say, your time is going to come. The same thing is going to happen with the other team that's ripping out with you. So I think those were 2 things that, to go back to your point, Mike, those were the things that made me want to hurry up and get back to the next mission, the next deployment.
I think in our communities as well, we had the luxury of having shorter duration, high tempo deployments. In the conventional forces in Canada, it was generally a 6 to 9 month deployment, and then watching American conventional forces deploy for a year. I mean, that's a really long time. And I think you hit it with, the mentioning of complacency. And there's, I think a maturity to know when you're starting to get vulnerable, when you're starting to get tired. Sometimes it's hard to kind of put your hand up and say, if we keep pushing on this tempo, we're going to make a mistake. So like you said, let's hand it over to the next crew coming in. High five, go home, get some rest and refit, sharpen your skills again and get back in the hopper.
Which, by the way, needs to be noted. Okay, that's part of that is also what happens as a problem in the overall strategy. When you're talking about nation building and coin, duration and relationship building on site is most important. I remember, dealing with Afghanis or dealing with Iraqis, and they were just wonderful people, generals or soldiers or whomever we were creating relationships with. And they were kind of like, okay, well, this is cool for the next 3 months or 6 months, but then someone else is going to come in, right? And so there's a dichotomy there that bit us in the ass.
Yeah, I saw it firsthand when 3rd and 7th group would tag team in and out of Afghanistan, and on paper it looks good by focusing both on that. But what would happen? 3rd group would come in and be like, hey, well, we got to unscrew everything 7th group did, and vice versa. There was never a real
continuity.
Consistent and continuous end goal.
And the other thing, I think that we're living it now with the current events. It's very difficult to give an end date to your enemy, and how can we even think about saying we're out on this date, and we're working in a 24-hour news cycle, and we're working in a 4-hour election or a 4-year election cycle. And I can vividly remember a discussion I had with an elder in a village, Pashtun elder, and I think one of their sort of sayings was, you guys have the watches, we have the time.
Yeah.
And they're like, we'll just wait you out. Like, we know you guys are taking off. We know you have an election in 4 years. We know this is strategic. We'll just wait you out.
Yeah.
Another
problem with the way sometimes we as the military look at conflict. We look at it as a finite game versus an infinite game, right? And World War II was very simple. It was it's finite, right? Beat the Nazis, beat the Japanese, we're done, right? Vietnam, infinite, right? Counterterrorism, infinite. There is no end state. There's no end goal. The rules are different. The conditions are different, and the overall goal and the overall patience and timing is different.
And with Afghanistan, I mean, we weren't fighting against the Afghanis.
No,
we weren't fighting to defeat Afghanistan.
No,
we weren't fighting against the Afghanis.
No,
we weren't fighting to defeat Afghanistan.
No.
I mean, the Afghan theater might have closed, but the war is still very much on.
Yeah. Well, add to that, there's two different facets. People conflate the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. They're two different groups with two different goals, right?
Yeah.
Taliban, of course, they were more focused on Afghanistan and their form of governance inside of Afghanistan and some of Pakistan. Al-Qaeda was global. They were more like, hey, we're every plight of the Muslim around the world is our problem, whereas the Taliban didn't think that way, and that was again another one of our missteps was to conflate the two, and I think look at the two as the same.
So I think this is a good point, that leaders have to set expectations. We were at war before September 11th. We just didn't realize it. We didn't want to acknowledge it, and we should have set expectations that this is going to be a century-long fight. We're at war with terrorism. We're not fighting a nation state. There is evil out there that exists, and it means to do harm to America for what we stand for and what we believe. And unfortunately, that fight is continual. I don't think it's without end.
Well, it's without end, and it's situational. I mean, we have to remember the Taliban took control in the mid-'90s, okay, and they did so because after the Russians left, the country began to fall into disarray. Warlords took over different facets, and the Taliban kind of created themselves to take over that. They kind of got rid of all the warlords. They implemented Sharia law, right? Not really big on infrastructure, the other elements of creating a society and a structure around a city or a nation. But that's what they did. They sent delegations to the U.S. in the late '90s. We had Taliban delegations come to the U.S. And some of the nations in the Middle East recognized the Taliban officially as the governing body of Afghanistan. So it was only 9/11 that started to kind of highlight for most of us the connection and the safe haven that type of environment allowed Al-Qaeda, because of course we had Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda working in that zone. But again, these are distinctions that were a little bit brushed over at the beginning, and not, I don't think, effectively addressed as we moved down the 20-year conflict, and we're seeing the results of it today.
Wanted to talk about, in the early days of the war and your early deployments, how much of the overarching strategy played into your mindset and how you approached the war for both Iraq and Afghanistan. Let's start with Rich.
Well, okay, not that much, but I'm going to give us a little bit of a pass here because when you're at certain ranks in the military, you are given missions that sometimes don't give you a good sense of the overall strategy. That's number one. And number two, at the very beginnings of the war, the strategy was go in and find the terrorists. I mean, that was it. There was, at least for us at our level, right, and certainly at the spec ops level, there was not a lot of talk about nation building or things like that. So yeah, admittedly, it was like, hey, let's go in there, and what's our area of operations, whether it be Iraq or Afghanistan. Let's figure out who the bad guys are and where they are. And go find them. And that was our focus. Do the job, and
more or less to go hunt.
To go hunt,
go hunt.
But again, that's part of that. Hey, what is our present thing? I'm going to focus on the present moment. I'm a lieutenant. I'm going to let my commanders worry about the overarching strategy. I'm just going to basically do my piece with my troop or platoon.
Eric.
I think for me, understanding the strategy and understanding the vision was important, just for the reason that I wanted to make sure, I kept my troop commander out of jail. I did not really care about the strategy or necessarily winning hearts and minds. I wanted to understand so well the ROEs and the strategy that I can navigate that gray area, because we understand what is necessary in order to get bombs on target or get bullets down range. So it's just understanding that and figuring out creative ways to dance around that was my main priority. And then it shifted a little bit when I saw failed states and women and children being displaced. At that point, then I started getting really involved. But in the very beginning, it was just, how can I get a bomb down without getting my commander put in jail? That was my only thought.
And take out as many of the enemy combatants as possible without civilian casualties.
Right.
Brent.
I would say, being a Green Beret early in my career, that's something we do think about a little bit more, even though I was, an E5, E6 at the time. So it was something that came across our radar. However, I will say this, and early on in my career, I was lucky enough to knock out Afghanistan and Iraq. In Afghanistan, we knew early on that our partner force was lacking, and that. And 20 years later, the indicators were there. But our way early on, we knew we needed to hit a lot of targets and hit a lot of targets fast, because that's, in our mind, that was the easiest way to give them a chance at some sort of operational freedom, because they couldn't handle a whole lot of enemy pushback. So the more targets we hit, the better chance of success they had. But in Iraq, I don't feel like we had that same sense of urgency in Iraq with our partner force. They seemed a little bit more competent, and although the surge time was a little bit of the same mindset, how many targets can we hit to push the enemy back, we did it more with them. So even early on, as you asked me this question, I'm kind of looking back thinking that there was a difference between Iraq and Afghanistan with our partner forces.
Brent, you brought up a point.
The cultures of them.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Two entirely different problem sets. And I think the problem was, as we got into Iraq, we started to approach Afghanistan with the same same mindset. And there's a phrase in the military: "Don't ever fight the last war." Mm-hmm. Each war is unique. Brett, you bring up a point I'm going to come back to, but Glenn.
Yeah, I think looking at strategy, we always tried to understand our role as a tactical resource delivering a strategic effect, and we really tried to own that in its truest sense. And so, from an ROE perspective, we had the most robust ROE you could ever have. Mission task verbs showing up in op words of kill or capture. That's a pretty powerful mission task verb. And again, like I kind of said, the maturity side on. At first, I was very much like, yeah, let's just go out and hammer these targets and do what we can. And then I started to understand sort of a lot of the legal implications of, how target sets got put together and the type of scrutiny and diligence that went into it, to basically authorize a target pack with that type of authority. And it's an incredible amount of responsibility. And, I think we were able to deliver a better strategic effect by understanding sort of where it all fit in the order of things. And it gave us, I think, moral high ground to show that we could be just as violent as these terrorists, but we're going to do so with the type of ruthless precision that also included the diligence and validation of target vetting. And, the thought process into your line of work where, you're using air power with extreme precision and being very cautious of, what the collateral damage would look like, and weighing that against tactical success over strategic failures.
Were we too cautious about collateral damage? Whereas you look at our predecessors in World War II, and albeit that was a completely different war, where civilian casualties at a higher percentage were acceptable. Do you think we were too cautious of collateral damage, both in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yes.
Yeah. I would actually disagree. I don't think we were. I think there were elements of certain commanders who would restrain and restrict because they were hyper cautious. But I think overall, I was actually pretty impressed going in at the level of awareness and strategic precision of both us as operators and of precision weapons and things like that, to take those things into account. I think the caution should have been applauded more than it was even at the beginning stages, because we did we were really quite focused on it. We want to make sure we were doing the right thing.
I was impressed by the conduct
Yeah.
of our soldiers on the ground. But Brent,
Yeah, and although I agree with what you said, but the reason why I said yes, we were too cautious, and let me set the stage for that answer. I don't believe we gave our commanders and people who had the authority to drop bombs enough leeway when they needed it the most to weigh collateral damage with the whatever situation they were in. It was a hard and fast rule at some point of just zero tolerance for collateral damage. And I think anytime you have rules that are that rigid, you're going to come across a problem. So that's how I would set that stage.
Well, and I would agree with you, because I think a lot of the collateral damage talk came from the higher levels, and in fact came in a quite binary way. Either it was, hey, just go do your job, you're okay, or hey, stop everything, zero, right? And it's never that simple. So I think so it became a little bit confusing on the pointy end.
I think this is a fair statement that aversion to collateral damage got worse with
absolutely.
each year.
Yeah.
To the point where it became binary, where it was totally unacceptable. Would you say that collateral damage became a weapon used by our adversary from a public relations standpoint?
Hands down.
Oh yeah.
100%.
But I mean, part of that was because of our misunderstanding. I wouldn't say misunderstanding, but our slow learning process on some of the cultural aspects. I mean, every household in Afghanistan has an AK-47 in it. Every male in that household has the ability and the kind of fruition to protect their homes, right? So whether or not we were going on a target that was legitimately a bad guy, or just, oh shoot, this was the wrong house, you were likely going to have someone who was going to be pointing a gun at you, which doesn't result very well. And so those types of incidences, while we tried to mitigate them on our end, served to not be explained very well. So
I think collateral damage also is prevalent in war. And if we're saying that we're in war, and we are, that's what we were saying, then war is hell. And I think collateral damage happens, but we were actually in a conflict. So there, with all the ROEs and the regulations that kept on coming down, it was regulations as if we were in a conflict. And I'm sorry to say, anybody who hasn't been on the ground and that doesn't know what we were actually dealing with, we were dealing with some nasty, nasty war scenarios. Mm-hmm. And to try and govern operations like, and I use CAS for an example, close air support, there's a difference between air interdiction or dropping bombs when there's no friendlies forward, opposed to friendlies being on the ground to nominate targets and say, yeah, this is a valid target and it needs to go away. And yeah, maybe there might be some second explosion that happens that takes out another building, but that's part of war. So when you start tying the hands of guys and saying, yeah, you can't, there is zero effects that are allowed to hit any surrounding building. Well, you just told us we're not allowed to use gas anymore.
Right.
We can't drop bombs anymore.
That question's right in your wheelhouse. I mean, that's what you did.
Right.
Like you drop bombs, whether on the ground or from a strike cell.
Yep.
And collateral damage really, I'm sure, played a part in every bomb you dropped.
Every single one.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many times you run that scenario, 1,000 times. There is effects that will affect the surrounding area that you did not plan for. Yeah. That's explosive power right there. Mm-hmm. You can't not have that.
Think about it in this light, and again, like this is the life that you had to live and deal with. But even as an assaulter, having relationships with you guys, every controller I worked with will joke about some sort of 15-6 investigation they've been under.
You got 20 of them.
But right, it's insane to me, how controllers are investigated as much as they are, which I think shows the level of restrictions. And I don't know a single controller that just sent bombs willy nilly across the battlefield. So it's kind of crazy to think that they've had that many investigations.
And to Mike's point, that's where I think, to your point, is the enemy recognized that, so they used that as a weapon, and that ended up tying our hands. And it made it very difficult for us to prosecute targets, knowing that we're going to get out of this as, hey, mission success. Yeah, we had to drop a bomb. No, now you're making the decision. You're making the decision saying that we're going to drop this bomb, knowing that you're going to have to answer 20 questions when you get back. There is going to be an investigation because your enemy is going to claim that you just killed a school.
Not only do you answer questions when you get back, but it also shows up in the media on the home front when a very tactical action in a combat operation, which happened thousands of times a day, make it back to a strategic discussion by political decision makers. Right. And I think the adversaries that we have faced are pretty smart guys, and they know how to exploit those, very tactical actions that we, would just process, ad nauseum and throughout operations, and pick the ones that you needed to exploit to change the will of a country, or have divisive politics, or get an exit discussion going, or bog down discussions in parliament over things that are, your bread and butter, dropping a bomb or a casualty or a roadside bomb or something that was very tactical that ended up into a strategic discussion.
I got a random question for Eric that I got you here. We don't just tell jokes and don't talk about these things a whole lot. Would you say that went into your decision making process when you drop bombs? That that was the political climate you were in, or you were able to kind of push that out, and you feel like you always made whatever decision you made completely with that not affecting you?
Early in my career, early in the war, there was less scrutiny, and I was able to drop based off of the assurance that I had two commanders above me that would go to bat, and there would be no question. Later in my career, without a doubt, I had to run through all of that before I even could get on the radio to start the engagement process. Having all those thoughts in my head and then communicating with my commander to say, we're going to have to reword this, or we're going to have to develop this situation a little bit more in order to get the overhead, the generals that are watching this from thousands of miles away, to get this to look right. We know it's right. We know what the ground truth is. But yeah, that always went through my head, and that was part of my decision-making process before I asked the aircraft to clear some bombs off of its wings.
So Brent, I had the same exact question as he was talking. No. So would you say that degraded your ability, your reaction time to get effects on target?
Yes.
And your ability to protect the guys?
Yeah, the kill chain was extended by, and you could put all sorts of numbers on it, but I've been able to, and we train to be able to get munitions within 30 seconds. Based off of pilot proficiency, we can get munitions on target the legal way within 30 seconds. You should be able to do that. And I would say that it extended the kill chain up to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes when you're asking for authorities that are thousands of miles away. And this goes on the soapbox thing, but the GFC has the ground truth. The ground force commander should have the authority in any situation to make that call, but it got extended. It got extended, and it kept on getting worse. And I think it goes into one of your points, Mike, where you finally see this apparatus make it to this point of ineffectiveness, and then it's at the detriment of all the team guys. And if I have to work through all these processes in order to do my job, to save my team, then it starts thinking, okay, I think my time is up. I think this is it, because we're not in the wild, wild west anymore, and the good old days are over, and now we're doing surgery. You want us to do surgery, but we have it's like mass casualty. You want us to do this fine surgery with a scalpel, but you're putting us in Syria with 40,000 partner forces going after the worst evil that anybody's ever seen. Nobody has seen evil. If you don't know ISIS, they are pure evil. And that was it. That was it for me. I had to go.
Two questions. One that comes off of that. To me, it seems like we safeguarded our nation's people from seeing some of the things we saw over there to adequately help them understand what we were facing. I mean, we came over across videotapes on targets of beheadings and executions. The fact that ISIS was throwing gay Iraqi men from rooftops of multi-story buildings to their death. I still question that. Why didn't we advertise that to our American public at a more frequent rate? Why didn't we explain? Because I think that would have solidified the purpose of this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Progress, having this thought of being progressive and not showing that because it doesn't exist. I think that's one of the reasons that it doesn't get said, and unfortunately, that's to the demise of, if God forbid, knock on wood, that we have a stateside fight and that they see that the people that have been sheltered from it. I hope it never happens. That's the worst fear for me, is fighting in my own backyard and having my kids or my family see the pure evil that's out there. But it's out there. People don't understand.
I mean, it's not very transparent of us. And I know transparency is a sort of a common theme right now in this nation, is that we have to be more transparent. Brett?
I don't know how we as a nation can be so good at so many things, and how much good we do as a nation and don't get credit for. Whoever is in our PR department for the military and the nation of America, I do a better job. We are always behind on the messaging on that.
So as a non-American, you guys are damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, I feel like that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, geopolitically, America is damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You're either heavy-handed or you didn't do enough. You either left folks behind or you were too aggressive. And I think that's the burden of global leadership. Like any leader is responsible and accountable. I mean, America very much is sort of a global leader, and that damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of comes with the territory. And so I think, again, as sort of the outsider, non-American, watching how you guys have to deal with it, it makes it very difficult. I can only imagine, because, you kind of do have one hand tied behind your back, and no matter what action you take, 50% think it's the wrong action.
No.
And it's a very difficult position to be in, especially as, soldiers sort of doing the nation's bidding, being forward deployed, dealing with the nastiness with an incredible amount of responsibility. I was just going to say, Eric, your teammates supported me on 2 deployments. Mm-hmm. And I have never been more impressed with watching an orchestration of firepower that we saw you guys be able to deliver. And I've said it earlier, just watching it was awe-inspiring, but truly awe-inspiring, and an unbelievable amount of responsibility forced into a very, very short, stressful decision-making cycle. And so, trying to do the right thing, be grounded by ethical decision-making, not always making the right call, or having to make a tough decision that to achieve X, Y, and Z, or accomplish a mission, or save, our forces, you have to make hard decisions. So just, I think it should be, we're all in that position, but the amount of responsibility I think you guys carried, you shouldered a huge burden. So I'd just say thank you for that. And again, not to talk too long about this position of America in the world, we're seeing it right now with current events. It's a very difficult position to be in. And again, it's just, I haven't learned too many lessons that sort of I hold near and dear, but watch out when you back your guys into a corner, because you're going to come out swinging, and it's a really impressive sort of sight to watch. What happens when you guys mobilize and come out swinging? It's truly impressive.
Yeah, I know you don't want to do this, Mike, but I wonder what your opinion is on it. How do you educate somebody who's so ill prepared to see the real world? Because it's like it's a sheltered, fortunate world that they live in, that they were blessed to be born in a first world country. And I talk about the U.S. How could you explain pure evil to somebody who's can't even fathom it? They can't fathom doing the atrocious things to people that are unhuman. It's inhumane.
So, like all my material in life and teaching leadership, it's all plagiarized from other people. That phrase I used, "Don't view the world through rose-colored glasses. See it for what it is," actually came from a sit-down that I had with a bunch of SEALs that went out to Silicon Valley. We met with Secretary of State Schultz, the former Secretary of State, was on Iwo Jima as a Marine, and I can't remember who was Secretary of State under. I think it was Reagan during the early years. The way I would respond to that, Eric, is, we want our children to be the very best, and I think we overly safeguard our children. We stunt them in a way from growing up understanding that evil exists. Now, we're not going to show our kids the videos of the beheadings or the executions, but you do have to explain to them that there are bad people out there that want to do evil things to you. And that shouldn't cripple you with fear, but you should recognize that that is just the world that we live in, and slowly ramp up and elevate that understanding of evil. But we should have, and I don't think media was our friend much like it was during World War II. I actually think the enemy used our media to their advantage, but there was no reason to give a warning to the public about what we're about to screen, to show them the things that are going on over there. Not in a propaganda way, but just to say, hey, we want to show you the reality of what's going on over there.
I don't want to make it like a conspiracy theory by any means, because that's not who I am. But I can't help but maybe think political correctness has a part to do with it. That I don't think it's the driving factor, but I think it's an underlying factor where we as America don't want to show certain groups of people and certain religions doing atrocities and have that be tied into the very diverse culture that we have here and the backlash that comes from that. So we'll just we won't talk about the really bad things that are happening. We'll just talk about the generalities of it. I don't know. What are your thoughts,
Brett? To Rich's point earlier, the videos of several nations people in the streets celebrating the 9/11 attacks, that wasn't widely distributed.
Right.
That was actually we hid that as quickly as possible.
Yeah. There is. So I'm going to agree with you. I think there's political correctness. Let me just hit this transparency question from a different angle. All right, because I had a conversation with a good friend of mine. It was during the war years, and both of us found ourselves back at home. We were frustrated, because we saw the American Idol society and people more concerned about the Kardashians than they were about what was going on overseas. And we
who are the Kardashians?
Yeah, I don't know. And we had to really talk this out, and in talking it out, we kind of came to this question, and that is what is freedom? What are we actually fighting for? Okay, I think all of us can have the story, at least as kids, have the story of leaving our, getting on the plane to go overseas, and oftentimes it's like at midnight or 1 a.m. Right? For some reason, we're always leaving at night, so we hit the cycles properly. So I know I would always, before leaving, and my kids were small, I'd go into their rooms and just watch them sleeping, and all of us do that, to this day. Probably not my teenagers anymore; they think that was weird, but you watch your kids sleep, and I remember, every time I watched my kids sleep, I would wonder what they were dreaming. Right. And I would hope that they were dreaming about sugar plums and fairies or whatever it is. Okay. Cool stuff, And so it we kind of came to the conclusion that one of the things we were fighting for was the bliss of ignorance, because that's what America, in some versions, is, right. Well, I didn't want my kids to see what I saw. I didn't want them to live what I lived. I was doing it so they didn't have to. Now that comes with a caveat, right? Because you have to introduce people and your kids to evil, and I say evil in a very conditional way. Okay, evil, the construct of evil is a human construct. We define, it's a human perception. It's a human definition, because the ISIS guys don't think they're evil. They think we're evil, right? And I think it's more important for us to educate our children, and in fact educate all Americans on doing the thought experiment on evil and what it is and what it means, instead of just labeling. I think a part of our problem is, especially today, with the political correctness on one side and the absolute kind of fanaticism in some cases on other sides, is the binary nature of arguments today. And our politics now has reflected that. It's either red or blue. And it's just so much more nuanced. The stuff all of us can understand, because we know this kind of in our heart. I mean, we would go into targets and shoot a bad guy in 1 second, and the other moment be taking care of kids and women and children in a fatherly way, right? We were switching. We were flipping this switch within seconds on a target. And that type of balance that I think needs to be more explained. Look at what these folks are doing, whether it was us or other forces, the ability to move inside of this really weird, horrible environment. I think it's more, what we need is a permission to think, and permission to debate, and permission to disagree. All of us, it's cool because I could say something that any of you say, you know what, I completely disagree, right? And we'd have a wonderful discussion about it. We'd still love each other like brothers. That's what we need more of, and I think that's what we have to promote more of, and it would allow for a lot more, flexibility in our ability to do our jobs.
I agree.
In retrospect, Rich, of the last 20 years, we could have done a better job of exposing our American people to the realities of what was going on
Right.
there. So I think we all agree, and it's a severe lesson learned, is slowly exposing your children to the realities of the world.
Yeah.
And doing it in a very deliberate manner.